Thank you so much for being here at this event today. For anybody that's new to these events or new to us and this space, it's lovely to have you here. My name's Stephanie Unthank, and I'm the director for BAMBA, the British Association of Mindfulness-Based Approaches. This is our first event of 2026, and what an amazing way to start. So thank you for being here. We have a particularly full crowd at this event. So yeah, it's so lovely to have you all here. Good. Okay, let me begin by just doing some introductions, I guess. So this event today focused particularly on neurodiversity, hosted by BAMBA, but with two absolutely wonderful speakers. We've got Liesl Laidlaw. Liesl, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little wave, thank you. Who's a CBT therapist and a BAMBA registered mindfulness specialist with ADHD lived experiences. And then we have Christoph Spiessens, and again, hi to Christoph, thank you, who holds an MA in teaching mindfulness, is a mindfulness supervisor, and self-identifies as a highly sensitive person with some trauma-acquired neurodivergence. So a bit of background about our two speakers today. Now, there's a few things that we would like the audience to consider, a few points for you to, I guess, just become curious of and to be with and, yeah, to, I guess, turn towards today with this session. Firstly, that this session is very much outlined as an introduction, that the learning from this topic is, I think, fair to say, ongoing for all of us and changing daily, and it's lifelong, just as much as I guess we can consider mindfulness to be. When the session starts, it could be really useful actually for the group to keep the chat function, particularly for questions, because we'll be able to collect and look at those questions towards the second half of the session, rather than to expect any general discussion as we move through. And this will really help us to make sure that questions don't get lost along the way and they remain manageable. And then finally, just to clarify that the speakers today, so Christoph and Liesl and myself here, at least for this first few moments, are going to appear in the follow-up recording. The Q&A won't be included in the follow-up recording. And this is just so that you're aware that as we record the session, it's the speakers that we're spotlighting and not those that are attending this event in terms of the general audience. So just to make that really clear. And I hope that sits okay with everybody as we navigate through this session. But without any further ado, it would be really lovely now to hand over to our two co-hosts, Christoph and Liesl. Welcome here today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the space and for helping us to create this moment. We appreciate you.
Thank you for introducing us. Okay. In order to help us settle into this session, I wonder if we're all up for a little settling practice. And you get to choose whether you take part in the settling practice or whether you need to do something else that helps you settle. It's all down to what we need right now. So for this settling practice, I'm standing because I've got the wriggles today. And so it helps me to be able to move and to stand. But let's be clear, you choose what your posture is, whether that's standing or sitting or lying down, whether you've got your camera on or off. It's really important to check in with ourselves as we're preparing to do our settling. Okay, so I'm not going to use a bell. I'm going to announce the start and the end of the settling. And I'm going to invite you to take some actions and make some choices. Okay. at the start of this practice, we choose an intention to give ourselves a moment to settle here in whatever way works for us. And the motivation for that, the why, the driver, is so that we can make best use of this time that we've committed to ourselves. Or whatever motivation is yours for why you're here right now. And as we are taking our awareness into the room, into the space that we're in right now, maybe we can notice external elements like the temperature, any sounds, any aromas in the room. And then take that awareness into the whole body, shifting our attention onto this whole body. And then as we notice what's going on with this body, whether it's the whole body or certain parts asking for attention, choosing to move the attention into our breathing if that feels appropriate. Noticing what's going on with the air moving in and out of this body. And then allowing the breathing to carry on just as it is. And maybe choosing to focus on a different area. If we're sitting, this might be useful to recognize the pressure on the surface we're sitting on as our sit bones press into the surface. Our muscles relax and spread out. And then maybe we can take that attention down the legs and into what's going on in our feet. What are we noticing in the feet right now? Whatever's there is the real experience I'm having right now. Maybe there's lots of sensations. Maybe there's nothing at all. And either is what is happening for me right now. Maybe we can notice contact with socks, with the floor, whatever's there. And in this moment, we have the opportunity to release ourselves into the certain support of the earth as it holds our body. And noticing as we do that, how this body is also supporting our mind. And allowing ourselves to be with that. And as we're going towards the end of this practice, maybe we can take whatever we've gathered from this practice into the rest of today's session to benefit ourselves and everyone around us. And now I'll invite you to do whatever your body feels it needs as we transition between this practice and our session. So I'm needing a stretch. Maybe a yawn is appropriate. Perhaps if you've got a drink of something, this is the right place for that. If a bit more wriggling is necessary, on you go. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Liesl. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Stephanie, for the warm introductions, the warm welcome. We're super excited to be here. And yeah, as Liesl mentioned, doing what is supportive for you is essential during this session. And so your camera can be on or off. One thing that personally I find really helpful is to enable the captions, the CC option, which on my screen is at the bottom of my screen. What happens when you click on that, in case you're not familiar with it, is that you get a transcript of the session, like subtitles. So that may be helpful for some people if the volume is quiet or if there's, my accent, for example. As Liesl mentioned, feel free to move throughout the session. You'll see us do it a lot, whatever supports you. If you want to go and grab a fidget toy, a sensory tool. And with regards to, sometimes we have this, we think we want to capture all the learning and we want to write everything down. If it's helpful to know, we will send you a PDF with sort of the key points of our talk today. So maybe that's helpful in letting go of some of that self-imposed pressure. Yeah. So about a year and a half ago, actually, a few people wanted to take an MBSR course with me. And these few people turned out to be neurodivergent, and they told me about their neurotype. And from the intake interviews and the orientation session, it pretty soon became clear to me. I soon realized that parts of certain practices and parts of certain models that we teach in our 8-week courses might be experienced quite differently and perhaps therefore not be accessible at all. And the long story short is that this created a little bit of a personal crisis. I had just finished my master's. My confidence was high. I was qualified. I was super happy. I was ready to go and continue teaching MBSR. But the crisis was because, on the one hand, we know that mindfulness is inherently, integrally inclusive. Yeah. But just because that may be the case in theory doesn't make it so in practice, right? And so that was one thing. And the other sort of insight that I got was, goodness me, these people have disclosed their neurodivergence with me. What about people in previous groups? What about people in groups in corporate settings? So a lot happened for me in a very short space of time. But rather than cancel the course, come up with some excuse, I learned as much as I could about some neurodiversity and neurodivergence basics as quickly as I could, as much as I could. And I was transparent with my group. And I told them that I was open to feedback throughout the 8-week course. And we sort of, I helped him and they helped me. And it turned out to be a really positive experience for all of us. And then after the course had finished, I wrote about my experience on LinkedIn. And that I would soon be sharing my learning with my peers, because that I felt really excited about all this. It was like a whole new world opening up to me, which is a metaphor. And we'll talk about metaphors may or may not always be helpful to people. But I was learning a lot very quickly. And there's this wonderful stranger with ADHD on LinkedIn who comments on this post saying, I'd be very interested to learn more about what you learned, because nothing about us without us. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, my confidence I felt zapped. And of course, this wonderful stranger turned out to be Liesl. And I shouldn't have worried, because we had a Zoom call. We clicked immediately. And I said to Liesl, look, I'm currently sort of processing all my learning and bringing it all together through the framework of the MBI TAC, through a lens of neurodiversity. And this is what I've got. Would you be interested in, checking it over and adding to it? And she did, and she made it a million times stronger, of course, and better. And we've since been helping peers, develop their neuro-inclusive teaching skills using our own framework. And we'll talk a bit about the framework in a moment. Well, not a bit, we're going to talk about it for quite some time. In fact, we're going to talk about for most of the session, with Q&A at the end. So we want to say thank you to Bamba for having us here, for hosting this important topic we feel is important. We want to thank you all for your presence here today. And if you're watching or listening to this on the replay, then we feel a strong connection to you too. So thank you for catching up via this way. Because we've received quite a few messages from people who told us we'd love to be there, but we can't quite make it, but we'll be watching later on. And also, before I hand back over to Liesel, to acknowledge that it's not just us doing this awareness training. There's many other people in the field who are doing this. We just feel very happy that we got the chance to do it on the big Bamba stage, so to speak. And of course, that we borrow very gratefully from experts in the field of neurodiversity. So thank you. That was a little bit of the backstory as to how Liesel and I met, what brought us here. And Liesel will now take you through the agenda and why neurodiversity awareness training matters so much. And I'm going to bring up the slide for you, my friend. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so as you'll learn as we go throughout today, making it explicit what we're doing, what we're about to do next, what the purposes of everything is really part of being neuro-inclusive. And as such, I'm talking you through our agenda just now. These are just the kind of high level areas we're going to cover in the agenda. Obviously, each part has a lot more underneath it, but just so you can understand where we are in the process of what we're doing today. The first part we're talking about is why neurodiversity matters. Neurodiversity awareness matters. I'll go into a bit more detail on that. And then we'll go into tips from our skillful teaching wheel. And that's going to take us up to probably the hour. And then the intention is to have a little bit of breakout option and then some Q&A at the end. Each of those headings have quite a few bits underneath it. So it's not just, 3 sentences and we're done. Okay, Christoph, could we go on to the next slide? Please, thank you. Okay, so before we get going, I thought it might be useful to differentiate between these two words because we often see that people use neurodiverse and neurodivergent interchangeably, and actually they don't mean the same thing. And so it helps us to understand when I say neurodiverse, what I mean, and when I say neurodivergent, what I mean. If we look at the whole of the population, and we recognize that there is a variety of differences in the whole human population. That's the diversity of humanity. If we then look at neurotypes, we recognize that there's a whole variety of neurotypes in the whole population. And so the population is neurodiverse. A group can be neurodiverse, but an individual can't be neurodiverse because it's one. So that's what brings us to neurodivergent then. Neurodivergent means to diverge from the neuro norm. I'm putting heavy caveats and air quotes on that. And what we mean by that is when somebody has a variety of traits that means that they think differently, they process differently, they experience the world differently from what the social norm is. It's a statistical thing. It's a thing we've made up. We need to be aware that we're all different and we're all different in different ways. This is just one of those differences we're looking at today is neurodivergence and the neurodiversity of everyone we're working with. Thank you, Christoph. Can we shift on to the next bit, please? Thank you. So it helps us to have an idea of what it is we're coming to gather here today. What am I gaining? And first of all, I assume, and having a look through the room, the vast majority of us here are teachers, and some of them are very senior teachers, so I'm not feeling any nerves at all. What we're intending to look at today is helping ourselves to reduce the risk of causing unintentional harm and re-traumatizing to our participants. It's the very last thing we want, right? We've got great intentions for what we want to do, but sometimes accidentally we knock things over with our elbow, which is a metaphor, but we do things unintentionally. It increases our awareness of what support needs might be out there, and including those ones that may be to do with physical health and mental health as they overlap with neurodivergent. I can do this. Neurodivergence, thank you. And it increases the management of sensory and interoceptive differences. So if we're aware of what they are and how they might affect things, then we know how to manage and support our participants better. And it improves our teaching clarity, how flexible we are in how we teach that, how effective we are in conveying that, and how inclusive we can be with the people who are in our course. But let's also talk about the participants, right? What are they going to gain from this? Because it's all great saying, oh, the teachers get everything, but the participants are really why we're here. We want to make our teaching as inclusive as possible, make it easier for people to access what we're doing. Otherwise, it's only just for a certain section of the population, and that's not okay. That's not really what mindfulness is about. It reduces uncertainty for our participants. And when people feel safe or certain about what's going on, it's much easier for them to learn and explore and venture out to have, have adventures. It reduces risk to our participants of harm and re-traumatizing. If somebody feels safe and can settle into the idea that I'm not going to experience the same kind of nonsense I've received in other areas of my life, they can let go of that and then start engaging in what we're doing. And we've all probably, no, we haven't all, hang on, I just fell in a trap. Many of us will have, in our learning of mindfulness, fallen into the whole, oh, I'm not good at this, I can't do it, I'm failing at mindfulness thing. This, for neurodivergent people, it can be a whole lot more intense. And so if we can make things safe and allow people to get into a sort of place of exploring as opposed to criticizing, we can take away the risk of that failure and shame settling in. Not entirely, but we can take the edges off. We can make it more likely. And we can increase autonomy and agency and learning for our participants. They want to be in charge of what's going on so that they can choose when they keep themselves safe and when they fully fling themselves into what we're doing. So that's what we're all learning and gaining from today's session.
Thank you, Liesl. Thank you, everyone. And I love how candid we allow ourselves to be with regards to editing ourselves in real time. Whenever we notice ourselves using a metaphor or we make a generalization, we make an assumption, and it's absolutely wonderful because we want to model that. We want people to hopefully sort of leave the session thinking, oh my goodness, I do this too, or I wasn't quite aware how often this happens in my teaching or when I communicate with people, etc. That's one thing I wanted to say, and perhaps a clarification, Liesl. I'm just looking at you because we have to make sure that we got this correct. We aim to finish our presentation not at the top of the hour, but half past the hour.
Sorry.
So no, it's okay, because otherwise people might think we're going to run through this in 10 minutes, which is not going to happen.
Here's what flung me. I was looking at the full hour as opposed to the actual time. See, there's neurodivergence in action.
And my clock is over there by the window. So that's, if you see me looking over there, it's the clock and the window. If I want to give my eyes a break, if you see me looking slightly over there, that's where my notes are. So now you know that too. In the descriptor of the talk, you probably saw assumption right there. That we were going to present through the MBI TAC framework. And the MBI TAC, as another assumption coming up, we assume most of us know very well, is a globally acclaimed tool, the mindfulness-based interventions, teaching and assessment criteria, consisting of 6 domains and I believe 27 key features. Our framework builds on that, so we can build on strong foundations, and allows us to add and communicate key concepts from the field of neuro-inclusive mindfulness teaching. And in order for us to do that, we came up with our own framework, and we call it the Skillful Teaching Wheel. So it maps on very closely to the MBI TAC, but the first spoke of the wheel versus a domain in the TAC is called compass. And in a moment, Liesl will take that away. But so our 7 spokes are compass, considering, connecting, congruence, conducting, conveying, and community. So thank you, Liesl. I'm going to stop sharing and hand back over to you. And remember, we will give you a PDF handout with all of this information. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now admit that my compass page was in the wrong place. And for a moment there, I was having the heebie-jeebies. Okay. The heebie-jeebies have left. I found my page. We're all good. Okay, so in the same way as you might use a compass if you were going on a journey, we're using this first spoke as our kind of direction. We're choosing which way we're going and whether we're still on track for what it is we intended, i.e. supporting all of the participants in our sessions. It doesn't map onto any of the MBI tags because this is, as Christoph mentioned, is the one that we came up with as a sort of unifying one, the starter of. It really does link, however, to the way that we set an intention and a motivation for anything in mindfulness, right? We start off with the intention of A, doing no harm, and B, being as inclusive as we can be. And the motivation for that is it's the right thing to do. It matters to us as teachers to be as inclusive as we can be for the people that we're working with. And just like the compass, if we were going to go somewhere, it's kind of handy to have it from the start. So what is it we want to be considering in here? We want to be looking at safety, the ethics, the foundations of what we're working on here. So when do we start doing that? Well, unsurprisingly, well before you've even met the first person who's going to attend your course. So from the minute you set up a website, that's your opportunity to start considering everyone's experience, including neurodivergent participants. How welcoming and neuro-affirming your language is that you're using in there. The social media posts that you put out and how you make them accessible is going to be a bit more detail in how we can do that. How you use your emails, what you do in your intake, the tone that you use when you're doing all of those things, and your first session. All of that together sets the scene for what happens next with your participants. So as we've hopefully demonstrated, being predictable really helps. And we can do this because we can set out really detailed information about the structure of the course that we're going to run. So that people know that when they've signed up, what exactly they've signed up for, how long it's going to take, all that sort of stuff. Maybe we can put on things like images of the location if we're doing this in person, the parking area, the front door, the room we're going to be in. That kind of thing really helps to settle folk into understanding exactly what it is they're coming to. If we're going to be doing it online, there's different ways of doing that, but obviously, you know, the picture of my room, maybe a picture of me as the teacher in the environment that I'm going to be in would be useful, but I do that anyway when I'm doing anything on socials. And the next thing to consider is disclosure and access needs. Like Christoph said, we're not necessarily going to tell you they're neurodivergent. Not only that, they're probably not going to know in many cases. If you were born before 1994, there's a high chance you've lived through decades of neurodivergent life without actually being aware of it. And not everyone has a diagnosis. And if we're going to set off on this journey of being inclusive and we only include the people with a diagnosis, we're going to be losing quite a lump of people. And so it really helps us to take into consideration there is going to be a lump of people in our setting that will be neurodivergent. And then being aware of the intersectional identities that each person brings. We are all humans. That's the one thing that's the same. But our experiences, our backgrounds, our racial background, our socioeconomic background, everything that makes us up means that we experience the world in a slightly different way from the next person. And if we make that explicit, it makes it okay for us to be as we are and who we are without having to conform for the sake of fitting in. Okay, as we're intending to do with the rest of the spokes, I propose that we take a little moment just now, maybe 30 seconds, to settle with whatever's come up for us during that little discussion. Maybe note any questions that we might like to ask later on. And just wonder, in what way am I already being neuro-affirming in what I do? And maybe what else could I do that's going to be even more neuro-affirming than I am behaving right now?
Thank you, Liesl. Thank you, everyone. It's only a few moments between each of the spokes. So, moving into the second spoke, which is called considering. This is the spoke where we begin to map our framework onto the MBI tag. because considering maps onto domain 1, which is all about coverage of the curriculum, pacing, organization of the curriculum, classroom logistics, and so forth. What's important here is this word considering. What are we considering? We are considering at all times, whether I'm teaching, whether I'm setting up the learning environment, or whether it's about workbooks and course materials, etc. Considering at all times my participants' autonomy. Autonomy is central to neurodiversity because the movement is fundamentally about recognizing that neurodivergent people are full agents of their own lives. They're not problems to be managed or corrected. And it's lovely to see some people nodding, perhaps a strong resonance with that. However, historically, of course, very often neurological differences have been framed as deficits, and often to justify a sense of external control. And even today, right? Workplaces, for example, institutions, clinicians, educators. But autonomy really means, again, neurodivergent people are the experts on their own experiences, and that neurological differences are not inherently pathologies, and that support should be chosen by our participants and not imposed by us. Just because the teacher wants to do it a certain way and says, this will help you, that doesn't mean that's anywhere near what the person in front of the teacher actually needs, right? And so things become consent-based, reflecting the participants' values, not the teacher's comfort or the mainstream conventional ways of teaching mindfulness. This is how we've always done it this way. Because people thrive when they have choice and control over how they learn. I'll repeat that. People thrive when they have choice and control over how they learn. Yeah. Now you might think, okay, Chris, that's great, but I have a curriculum to teach. Like I can, I understand the autonomy bit, but I've got this curriculum to teach and I have to go through this and I need people to follow. Fair enough. That's a valid thought. That is your experience. Certainly been my experience in the past. You'll be pleased to know that's an assumption. You see, they creep in so easily. You may be pleased to know, I don't know, that overall neurodivergent participants benefit from keeping to the announced themes, the activities, timings, etc. But a key message here is pacing. Why? Because neurodivergent participants may process information at very different speeds. Some can follow with ease, others will take more time to integrate information. Yeah. And so, for example, this can happen after you've shared a poem with your group, or you've used a metaphor. Sometimes because of some confusion, perhaps, or maybe because of some deeper contemplation, there may be a sense of things slowing down. And it may well affect the flow of your session. But again, this is not a deficit. It is not a problem. It's a difference in processing style. That's it. It's a difference in processing style. And awareness of this can help you pace accordingly. With regards to the learning environment, here too, it's all about autonomy. Simple things, really, from room temperature to sitting in a circle together, to the lights, the brightness of your room. Often assumptions come into play. Yeah, we've always done it this way. We're encouraged to sit people in a circle, for example. It's box standard. We know how it goes. Not necessarily going to create a safe and comfortable and conducive to learning environment for everyone in your group. So, same with the sound of your meditation bell. You might think it's nice. It may well sound like hell to some people in your group, the sharpness of it. So what might make your participants feel comfortable? What might make your participants feel safe in the learning space? Yeah? How can you honor their autonomy? May well be different ways of signaling the start and the end of a practice. And there's some very interesting, I really do wish we had the time, but we don't. But even the slightest change in temperature can really affect nervous systems very differently. And therefore people can, you know, be more open or closed to what's happening, what's going on, and learning that takes place or not. With regards to materials, just briefly, we really want to point out the value of providing sensory tools, fidget toys, sensory tools, whatever you choose to call them, whatever your participants choose to call them. And they can really help anchor somebody in the present moments. They can help with attention regulation, emotion regulation, self-regulation overall, and also with interoception. So very useful for most of the practices, right? But the thing here is, and I've actually heard people say this, and maybe at one point I would have said it too, isn't that a bit childish? Is it like I'm dealing with adults here? I don't want to provide or hand out what looks like toys. Well, by enabling a choice, either here you can use a toy, a sensory tool or not, you actually enable participants' autonomy. So you're doing the right thing. You don't have to choose what works for them. You can't choose what works for, not them. Sorry, I was othering my neurodivergent participants there, but for some people in the group. Yeah. See, that's another one. Them, they kicks in very often, and we want to just shine a little spotlight on that whenever that happens. And finally, with regards to distributing our workbook, learning materials, some participants will be really grateful if they can have those materials ahead of the session. It will help with emotional preparation, cognitive preparation. What will the breakout room activities be like? Can really help with reassurance and therefore with learning and engaging with the teaching. Other people still may well prefer you to send the things out the day after the training, when they have more time to process and integrate the information. There is no universal preference that Liesl and I are aware of. Again, the golden rule is to check with what is supportive for your participants. So here too, let's take a moment, a few moments, 30 seconds or so, an opportunity to reflect on some of the things I've shared with regards to pacing or the learning environment or the timing of the distribution of workbook and other materials. Maybe something you want to ask us about later, maybe something you want to remind yourself of moving forward. And so we've covered compass, we've covered considering. We'll now move into our third spoke, and I'll hand back over to Liesl. Thank you, Liesl. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And it's okay if you're still scribbling, that's all right. In the interest of time, unfortunately, I do need to carry on, but I don't mind you making sure you've got what you need. Okay, so the third spoke is connection, which maps onto domain 2, the relational domain in the MBI tag. And this is really all about respect, right? In order for us to make a real connection with someone else, it really helps if we respect them. It's very hard to make a connection with someone you don't respect. It's not impossible, but it's easier if you respect them. And so if we are going to respect our neurodivergent participants, it's respectful not to pathologize whenever we're talking about anything about them, to them or to anyone else. And that includes being affirming of different ways of communicating. Some people need to talk a lot in order to be able to process what's going on around them, or in order to be able to ask loads of questions to understand what's going on. And if we don't let them, we're just about it's like trying to do a job with one hand behind your back, right? It's not so easy, and we're actually stopping them from being able to access what we're doing. Some people really need a bit longer to process what's going on. Some people don't want to talk about it today and we'll ask you about it tomorrow. And if we're not explicit about how we interact with those different ways of communication, we stand to risk that connection that we're making with our participants. Now, it does mean that sometimes you've got someone who talks about as much as I do, who may be wrecking your timeline, not intentionally, but because they're trying to connect and engage in what you're doing. And so if for any reason you need to manage that, it really, really matters to go, I understand that we all have different ways of communicating. I apologize for getting in the middle of your stream of consciousness, because actually I can see you're really engaged with this. However, I wonder if we can pick this up either afterwards or some other way that you can deal with it, so that people don't feel like you're criticizing their way of communicating, but you're also accommodating it. You're making sure that people do get the opportunity to communicate. And of course, if one person talks all the time, it means many other people don't get the opportunity. So let's balance that out. And with the different neurotypes, you're going to find different ways in which people engage. And so that's really important to keep in mind. And with that sits the whole microaggression business. I wonder how many of you have heard this phrase. We're all a little bit neurodivergent. Have you? Maybe you've even said it. Neurodivergent people become super uncomfortable when you say that, because we're not all a bit neurodivergent. We may all have indicators of what might be perceived as neurodivergence, but just because somebody doesn't like the big light doesn't necessarily mean they're neurodivergent. Just because somebody really needs to process in a verbal way, as I do, doesn't mean they're an ADHDer. Just because somebody really likes the detail of what's going on doesn't mean they're autistic. But those are still elements of their being, and we must not ignore it. And so we mustn't use microaggressions like this. And we'll get onto a bit more detail about that as we go along. Humor makes a big impact on connection, doesn't it? If you can connect well with humor, it's part of who you are. Go on, do it. But let's do it respectfully, and let's keep in mind that all kinds of humor do not land in the same way. For example, sarcasm doesn't land for everyone. My music teacher is autistic, and I went for a singing lesson yesterday, and I said something very sarcastic, and she said, "Really?" And I was like, "Oh, I just fell in my own in a hole of my own making." I went, "No, sarcasm, sorry." And so that's a miniature break in the connection. And so if we don't have to, let's not use it, or at least explain what we're doing so that everyone's in on the joke. Because, we're not part of the group if we're not part of the joke, not part of the people laughing at the joke. And if we can respect the different ways in which people want to be involved in inquiry and communication, like, for example, some people really like saying what they want to ask, or responding with their voice. Some people prefer to put things in the chat if you're going to be working online. Some folks really like writing down, and they might like to write it down for themselves and not for you. And that's just as valid as any of the other options. Some folks will sit and process the whole thing in complete silence. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they're not engaged. It's really genuinely just the way that they need to engage in what's going on. So, and also when it comes to inquiry, some folk might pass. You go, how was your experience? And somebody will go, I don't want to talk about it. That's okay. They don't have to talk about it. Neurodivergent people have lived through, especially late recognized ones, have lived through an awful lot of situations in which their autonomy has been squished, their boundaries has been overridden. And so let us be the safe place of those boundaries, instead of going, but we have to do inquiry. How else are we going to move this on? Let's find ways to adapt as we go. Okay. This is our opportunity to do a bit of pausing and reflecting. Maybe making a note of some Q&A. And here's some optional questions you might want to reflect on if this works for you. What would I do early on to support this connection? What can I do early on in my interactions with my participants to start working on the connection even before we're right in the middle of the course? Maybe I can do more of something or less of something to aid that. I can see lots of what looks like good contemplation, or it might just be simply looking out the window. And either is fine.
I agree. It's lovely to see.
Yeah. All right, oh, Christoph, are you ready to take us on to the next spoke of congruence?
Let's. And I just wanted to add a quick example of microaggressions as a gay man. For example, whenever I hear a teacher talk about mom and dad go to the shop, and that it's like why is always mom and dad? It's like just this assumption that that's what a family looks like, mom, dad, and the kids. How about dad, and the kids? So microaggressions can slip in very, very easily. Not intentionally, of course. Well, we should hope not, but that's how they are perceived by people very often. So moving on to the next spoke of our skillful teaching wheel, congruence. And this maps on to the third domain of the MBI TAC, which is embodiment, embodying, because it never stops. It's always a process. And we call it congruence because it's about the congruence between our internal experience as a teacher and our outward behavior. Yeah. And it's all about explaining. And I don't know if you've picked up on this, but for every spoke, there is sort of a keyword that we foreground. For compass, it was all about safety. For considering, it was all about autonomy. For connecting, it was all about respect. Well, when it comes to congruence, it's all about explain or explaining. I'm saying this with love. But conventional embodying tends to look calm, equanimous, serene. And we may or may not be familiar with this phrase, mindfulness is caught rather than taught, through how the teacher embodies the whole show. I'm being a little bit cheeky here in the way I go about this, but it's intentionally. It's intentional. Because although there is great value in that, the implicit model may not serve everyone in your group. And here's why. Behavior can be seen as vague. And that's going to potentially increase a sense of unsureness, a sense of uneasiness. And that may well increase a sense of a barrier between the participants and you. And that may increase a sense of feeling unsafe. And the long story short is that if that happens, then people are no longer really open to learning. So no matter how well, by the ways we were trained, we believe we are embodying this mindfulness, these attitudes, it may come across as vague, very differently from how we intended to come across. So what we would like to propose is a more explicit, a more transparent embodying instead. I can almost pick it up through the screen how some of this is landing or not landing with some people, because it is a big scoop, and allow it to be a big scoop. We're not saying traditional embodying is wrong. That's really not what we're saying. It's about knowing that it may not be interpreted in the way you would like it to be. So a more explicit, transparent embodying. So for example, If you see me looking out of the window, I need a moment to gather my thoughts, and I can do that. But if I explain that, then that's going to be helpful. Perhaps I need to self-regulate or I want to self-regulate, and I'm doing a few shoulder rolls or a few neck rolls when I'm talking to somebody or when I'm listening to somebody in the group. I can do that, but I can also explain what's happening, remove the ambiguity around that. And if I go quiet because I'm embodying letting be, for example, I can do that. But I can explain that the silence is intentional. Yeah. The benefit for me, for us as teachers, is that we don't have to put on this performance, this looking calm. And forgive me if this is not for you a performance at all. More often than not, it isn't a performance, but it can be. I'll speak to my own experience. Sometimes I look extremely serene, but then my legs, and you can't see it on Zoom, they're going all over the place because I'm nervous, or there's butterflies or whatever. I've become way more comfortable with saying what's going on. And actually by doing that in that moment, we module self-compassion, we module self-regulation. So it's a different way of embodying that may well be stronger and more helpful than the conventional way. So that's the benefit for us. For our participants, the big benefit is that they don't have to guess as to what's going on. And we're moving into the territory of sensitivity here. And this is really prevalent for many neurodivergent people. And oh my goodness, is the teacher okay? Is she okay? Are they okay? Did I say something wrong? Did I upset them? Because if we just nod or we look away for too long or we go quiet and we go inward, all the things that mindfulness teachers tend to do, that can really create this sense of us disapproving of what the participant said, or that we're disengaging from them. And so what this can cause is a real sense of rejection, and rejection sensitivity is really prevalent among neurodivergent participants. And speaking of sensitivity, another one that I want to mention is justice sensitivity. And here's why. So we're talking embodying congruence, embodying the mindfulness attitudes, right? So speaking of attitudes, and I'm going to we decided to pick out two, and I'm going to look at the notes because I really want to get this right because it's that important. Consider how the attitudes might come across to people in your group. So for example, the attitude of acceptance. It's a tall order when you find something unjust. So we should explain that it's about this exists. Homophobia, for example, this exists. Yeah? It's not about approving or accepting it. Yeah? It's just to name it. This exists. And then you can still be an activist and go from there. Yeah? It's the explaining that is helpful, the extra sort of layers of explaining. Another attitude, the final one, and before I hand back over to Liesel, is non-striving. And here's why. In mindfulness, we might mean non-fixing by non-striving, for example, but many neurodivergent people had to fix all of their lives and take pride in striving, working hard to develop resilience, for example. All these strengths that they've cultivated. And so this non-striving might come across as an invitation to abandon some of the very behaviors that have kept them safe from social rejection, from discrimination, and all of that. So we just have to be very, very mindful. In short, whether you embody attitudes of mindfulness or you talk about them, what is meant in a context of mindfulness can come across as ambiguous, vague, and it's wise to increase clarity, to name what's going on, to go a little bit more explicit, and perhaps then also liaise with your neurodivergent participants with the group and say, okay, what might this look like within your context instead? Thank you, everyone. Big scoop. Taking a few moments before we continue. Over to you, Liesel.
Thank you. Okay. Feel free to carry on scribbling if you're halfway through a sentence and you're not just ready yet. But we've also got time marching on. So let's try and do both at the same time, and you can join in as soon as you can. So the next book is Conducting, which maps over onto domain 4, guidance in the MBI tag. And the kind of unifying word here in conducting is adjusting. So it's about how we run our practices, how we are actually in the class. I've just realized I've taken my mala off and I'm fiddling about with it because I didn't bring a fidget, but I've got this. So if you were sitting in the room with me, you'd see me fiddling with this and you'd be, you could be wondering about what that's about. Well, it's about regulation. It's about anchoring in the moment. And so when we're practicing and we're teaching a practice, it really helps us to be able to adjust how we do that so that we can accommodate everyone in the room. In a mindfulness practice, it can happen that somebody insists that we use one anchor, the breath. And actually, that's not necessarily the best anchor for everyone in the room. Some people might have some real discomfort with anchoring in the breath. Perhaps we can give them a choice of what anchor they use, whether it's the breath, whether it's sound, whether it's an object, whatever feels like the appropriate anchor for that person, and permission to shift from one anchor to the next if it feels necessary or helpful. The posture, you saw us doing it earlier, where we get to say, right, so standard mindfulness often says this body scan is done lying down. None of us are standard in this room. We're all entirely individual. So if we're doing this body scan, we get to choose whether our body is going to be lying down, whether our body is going to do this standing up, whether it's maybe going to do it seated, whether perhaps we're going to be swaying as we do it. This body scan is your body. You get to decide what you do with your body. Things like whether your eyes are open or closed. Some folks, some teachers sort of give it a hierarchy of when you start off, you close your eyes, but later on, it's better if you have your eyes open. Well, for whom? It's not the same for everyone. If someone has had traumatic situations and don't feel safe with their eyes shut in a room full of people, it's not the right thing for them to do. So let's give people complete choice about what they do while giving them parameters, right? You don't just get to say, you don't just go, do anything you want. Because not everyone's going to know exactly what's right for them. So we give them the opportunity to try it on, to explore what the postures might be that they want to take on, etc. Things like movement, things like, you know what, if you need to step out any minute at all, you do that, and you're very welcome to come back anytime you want. We're going to give everyone in the room permission to do that if they wish. And obviously, for safety's sake, if you're leaving and you're not coming back, it's a really good idea for us to have a message so we know you're safe or what you're doing. Multiple anchors. This is the other thing. Sometimes we say, well, if you can't lie down, then maybe you could sit. Or if you can't lie down, perhaps standing up would work for the body scan. We're offering a hierarchy of which anchor is best or which posture is best. We want to try and do away with that. We want to try and make sure that people have a choice and not seeing their whatever they choose as inferior to whatever the teacher's preferred choice is. All of these things are just ways in, and it's not going to be the same for all of us. Focusing on the breath. So if we're focusing on the breath, this is sometimes going to happen, right? If somebody chooses the breath as the focus of where they want to put their attention, it might help to combine it with another sense. So for example, with the breath, we can use lotus hands. So opening the hand on the in breath, closing the hand on in breath and closing the hand on the out breath. can really help to focus the attention in one place, totally to do with the breath, but we're also using movement. We're also using sight if we're looking at the thing, and some proprioception because we're feeling the hand move alongside the breathing. Some folks like to do hand on the belly. Some folks like to sway to the one side on the in-breath and sway to the other side on the out-breath. Some folks like humming. Now, if you're doing this online, that's easy because everybody just mutes themselves and then you can hum away and it's not going to bother anyone. In the room, let's get some sort of consensus as to whether that's going to be okay, because we want to respect everyone else in the room as well. So if humming is something people want to do, maybe we can say if we're going to hum, let's do it at a sort of almost audible level so that we don't get everybody else's attention as we're doing so. Sensory adaptation, Christoph's mentioned this earlier, things like lighting, noises that are happening. I've heard so many stories of people going, they've rented a room and actually there was a festival happening next door, or somebody was creating some catering next door and there was smells and there was clattering in the kitchen, and trying to be settled in a place where there's so many other sensory distractions or perhaps obstacles could be tricky. So let's keep in mind that for some people, myself included, the big light feels like a personal attack. I don't want the big light. If I can help it, please can we mute it? But for some other people, that feels great because now I'm alive and I'm awake because I've got a big light on, right? So let's make sure that we bring this stuff into conversation. And if we're using poetry, poetry is very subjective in the way that it lands with people. And so the poet has a way they want to say it. The reader or the listener has a way it lands for them. And if poetry doesn't land with your participant, if they don't either understand the intention of it, and we haven't made it concrete at the beginning, saying, here's what we're trying to achieve by reading this poem, or maybe said it afterwards, once people have had an opportunity to see how it sits with them, then people are excluded again. So let's make sure that we use concrete language as well as poetry if we want to be doing that. And introduce the idea of the comfort, stretch, and panic model so that people can try things out. Just because you're comfortable with having the light dimmed doesn't mean it's really important for you never to have the light on. Perhaps it's not even possible to have that light dimmed, and you're going to have to see how you can manage, whether stretching the amount of time you spend with it is possible, whether you maybe need to leave the room a little bit every now and then. Maybe it would be helpful if you close your eyes to help with the light being so bright. Whatever way the teacher can help with this, whatever the way the participant can help with this comfort, stretch, panic model to make sure that we find ourselves either in the comfort or the stretch bit as opposed to the other. Clear beginnings and endings. We don't necessarily have to have a bell to indicate a clear beginning and an ending, but we must indicate that it's a beginning or an ending. Otherwise, people can be left kind of uncertain. I nearly said in limbo, and I was like, ha, that's not clear, is it? Not everyone understands what we mean when we say that. So clearly explaining that we're about to start, what the start sounds like or looks like, and what the ending is going to be like. There is a lot in conducting. It's kind of the center of what we're doing today. So let's have a moment to settle in with how that landed. I keep saying things that aren't exactly concrete, don't I? What came up for us as we were listening to that? What we might like to know about conducting our practices, and what we might be uncertain of for the Q&A later on. And once we've done this little bit of settling with it, we're going to move on to Christoph and the conveying. Christoph, we've got 2 spokes to go, and we need to keep an eye on where we are in the time because I want to make sure people have enough time.
We certainly do, yeah. But thank you, Liesl. So in a few moments, we'll move on to the penultimate spoke. And we'll allow ourselves this extra time. It may be an introductory session, but it's a positive challenge to share as much as we can within the time that we have. So I'm going to be okay with that, but we do promise that by Q2 we will start with the Q&A. So thank you, Liesl, and thank you, everyone. Moving on to the spoke of conveying, which moves maps onto domain 5 in the MBI TAC, communicating or conveying themes through inquiry and didactic presentations. I'm going to only speak very briefly to inquiry because I'm looking at my notes and a lot of it has already come up quite naturally. So I'm not going to repeat that. But the key word for conveying is access. For how do we want people to engage with the inquiry and to engage with our didactic teaching if they can't access the inquiry or the teaching in the first place? So it's this real focus on access. So some things to consider, as was already mentioned, but this one bears repeating. Some people need to speak in order to understand their experience. So that may come across as somebody who's very verbal, but there's processing going on. Other people require more time to formulate the thoughts in their head. Other people still need to move to think, and it may look disruptive. I'm using that word intentionally, but that is not what's going on. It's a processing. I love what Dr. Tamara Russell says. What if movements are thoughts trapped in the mind? What if movements are thoughts trapped in the mind? I'm one of these people. I sit behind my laptop trying to write something, nothing happens. I get up, things just pour out. I need to move to think. But here's the point. If we are going to interrupt, because during the inquiry, we're keen to get to a certain layer in the inquiry, we're keen to get a certain point across, then people are going to feel invalidated potentially, and it can be very unhelpful because shame can kick in, self-doubt, am I being disruptive, am I doing it wrong, and all of that. So to be mindful of that. With regards to didactic presentations, this one was probably the big one of the key takeaways from me working with this my first group of neurodivergent participants all this time ago. I love to explain models like the stress reaction cycle and the vicious flower. And of course, I find myself talking about terms like reactivity, maladaptive, unhelpful, dysfunctional, right? And often these words come from the medical model of disability. What I wasn't quite aware of is for how many neurodivergent people these can often be and have been and are adaptive survival strategies. So I think that I'm teaching the right way. I'm very passionate and excited about it, but actually, things can be taken as shameful, as condemning. So even a simple or more neutral, nothing's ever neutral, right? But a more neutral word like perception, for example, it's your perception, it's my perception. Without understanding how that comes across, without a careful, approach, this can be interpreted as a denial of someone's truth in that moment. So it's very, very subtle. And this feedback comes directly from those participants I had the privilege of journeying with. So these are their words almost. Because what can be really helpful is to, as a team, teacher and group, to co-create a helpful lexicon instead and say, this is what we're looking at today. This is the theme. This is what I want to communicate. And this is what we're exploring. These are the words we tend to use, and they may or may not, do the thing for you. Help me help you. Let's create a lexicon together. And so a more neurodiversity friendly approach frames reactivity and response as different options and consequences, for example, rather than this moral hierarchy of good versus bad. Maladaptive can become not currently helpful. Yeah. And perception could be how things appear to you in this moment, which may change. So in short, to increase access, the approach is to sort of say, okay, this is what we're intending to inquire into. This is what we're intending to learn about. What might this look like within your context? And then go from there. And that's how we will convey the real learning themes. I'm looking at the clock and I'm smiling inside because I managed to do that just within my time frame, and that gives Liesl an extra 4 minutes and 30 seconds to go into community whenever she is ready, whenever we feel ready as a group.
Oh, by the way, if you're ever teaching a neurodivergent group and you're encouraging people to clap, some people really don't handle clapping very well. This is what we do instead.
Mm.
Okay. In the interest of time, is it okay if I kick off this last spoke so that we can make sure we've got enough time for Q&A? And I have a nodding or a thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Super. Okay, I know some of us are still working at this, and I appreciate that you are engaging in this way. Community is our final spoke, and that maps onto domain 6, holding the group. And here the theme is, or the key word is difference. As we mentioned at the beginning, neurodiversity indicates that we are all different types of neurotype. There is a huge variety in how people are, how people behave, and how people perceive the world. And a community, therefore, means just that. We're all different. And if we ignore the fact that we're all different, we're not really a community. Then we become exclusive. And that isn't a fair or a safe place for people to be. So it's important that we recognize people's differences. It's important that we recognize people's needs. And what's even more entertaining is those needs may fluctuate, right? Some days, if I haven't had a sleep, perhaps I cannot cope with noise. If I've had a sleep, maybe I want all the noise. It completely depends on what my capacity is like on the day. And if we don't keep checking in with that, we're going to miss it. And we're going to make things hard for people to be part of the community. If we assume sameness, it means we're kind of erasing parts of people's identity. This idea of the word that I wrote and used earlier has now run away from my head. Intersectional identities. Thank you very much, brain. It took you a while, but you got there. Okay. Intersectional identities is really, really important. It makes up who we are. And that is part of how we're different from each other. As human beings, we all want safety. Of course we do. We want to have a bit of ease. We want to be well. But all of these things do not look the same for each of us because our differences mean that these things are different for each of us. And so if we go around saying we are all this and of course everyone and our, as we use, as we explain things, as we express things, we may in fact be excluding people instead of bringing them along on the journey, which is what the intention is. So let's be sensitive to that when we start talking about common humanity. Let's recognize that, yes, safety is something we all want, that ease is something we all want, but that it looks different for different people. And then the other thing to consider is this, your group cohesion, the old Tuckman model of what? Yes, you can do this. Forming, storming, norming, adjourning. I had to read it because I can't remember. May not look the same in a group that has neurodivergent people in it. It might take a bit longer because some folk might take a bit longer to feel safe. And if you're not safe, you're not going to feel part of a community and you're not going to behave as if you are part of the community. Some people may be doing the storming bit inside themselves instead of in the group, i.e. comparing their experience with how it looks like other people are experiencing this without even discussing it. And so those things mean that it's not necessarily sequential, this process, and perhaps it might take a little bit longer. And so that's important for us to keep in mind as a teacher, because this is going to affect our timeline. This is going to affect how people can interact with the practices that we've got set out intentionally to go with the process of the community forming. And as I've mentioned in the past about the universalities, if we erase people's differences, we're excluding them. So let's be clear that we are all different, and that is lovely. It's good that we are all different. We all bring things to our community with our differences. If it wasn't for our differences, we'd all be exactly the same, which means we really genuinely would be suffering in all the same ways. And we'd also be good at all the same things. Okay, I think I've covered that, Christoph. Is there anything that comes up for you about community that I have skipped?
What comes up for me, thank you, Diesel, and thank you, everyone, is that we can summarize the whole presentation into three key bullet points, in my opinion. It's about reducing barriers, reducing uncertainty, and then adapting and adjusting accordingly. This is something we believe to keep front of mind will be very helpful. We mentioned at the start of the presentation that we will send a one-pager quick reference sheet. This is what that looks like. So it contains many of the key messages from all of the 7 spokes. And so we've given you about 7 spokes times 3 key messages is 21 key messages. If you found this helpful and would like to learn more, Liesl and I are going to take this and do a little plug, and we're very happy and proud to present this. It's taken us many months to put together. Today, we use this session as an opportunity to announce the release of our PDF, which is the full skillful teaching wheel framework with 80 plus tips. Yeah, and it's available now from my website, which is our joint sort of home for the moment to release and share this PDF. So maybe something you want to explore, and thank you in advance for supporting our work. So thank you, Lisa.